Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I'm so happy that you're here. I hope you have a warm drink. It's a cold night, and I'm so excited to learn from our special speaker tonight. This is a great book, and it was recommended to us by one of our favorites, Julie Lycott-Haynes, who said, you must have this author. So it's been a year in the making, and we're finally getting to have that important conversation. The book is called The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond, Friendship. So the program tonight is called Friendship Factor, Nurtured Early and Often. We'll be talking about relationships in the real world and in the virtual world. And I know we're going to learn a lot tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you to the sponsors who make the Glenbard Parent Series program. This is the 26th year of the series. If you take a look at our brochure online or go to our website, glenbardgps.org, you'll see the names of all of our annual sponsors. Some have been with us all that time. On the back of the brochure, additional sponsors who make this possible. Please know that everyone is always welcome, near and far. And please, if you are a social media person, like us on Facebook, share the resource so even more people can hear about this opportunity as we discuss the challenges and opportunities of raising teens today. So this is a little bit of a different topic. Tonight, the format will be Lydia will speak for about 45 minutes or so. And then we have some students who are prepared to ask questions, and we look forward to answering your questions as well. So, and please list them in the Q&A or tell us your thoughts in the chat, and let's begin. Lydia Denworth is a contributing editor for Scientific American and columnist of the Brainwaves blog for Psychology Today. Her work has also appeared in The Atlantic, Newsweek, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Time, Spectrum, and many other publications. She's the author of 3 books of popular science. Toxic Truth told the story of how a scientist and a doctor risked their careers and reputations to sound the alarm bells about how lead was contaminating our environment and endangering our children. I Can Hear You Whisper is the story of her investigation into hearing, sound, brain plasticity, and deaf culture after she learned her own son could not hear. And tonight's book, Friendship, The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. She's the mother of 3, and she and her husband divide their time between their home in Brooklyn and their sustainable farm in central New York. But I know she's thrilled to be with us tonight as part of the Glenbard Parent Series. So let's welcome her. Lydia, take it away.
Hi, Gilda. Hi, everyone. It is so great to be with you tonight. I am coming to you from Brooklyn, not from the farm. And I am, let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. So just give me a second. Get myself, okay, here we go. We are going to talk about friendship, but of course, we're talking about this in the context of the last 2 years, which, let's be honest, has been rough, right? Especially for children and adolescents. And like so many of you in the audience, I have, as Gilda said, I have 3 sons, but one of them will go for the bulk of the pandemic. This is Alex, the one who's deaf, since you mentioned my book, I Can Hear You Whisper. He's 18 now. In March 2020, when the world shut down, he was a junior in high school. We spent those first 5-6 months at that farm in New York State because, you know, we were away from people. But then in September, we came back to Brooklyn so that he could do his senior year. Unfortunately, most of senior year was remote, and he and I really had a time of it. We have a great relationship, but there were some of the lowest points of our relationship came in the middle of the pandemic. And he did most of his classes from his bed. If I got him to sit up and put on a shirt and turn on his camera, I felt like I was winning. I think a lot of you probably were there. And we had a lot of arguments. We had arguments about friends and numbers of friends, tasks, and all the things that so many experience. But I say that the thing that got Alex through that very difficult senior year was his friends, the strength of his friends, this core group of good friends that he had, and the girlfriend that he had. And when we were able to create a pod, which we could do because we didn't have that much risk in our family, we made the decision that that was okay, and that's what got him through. Now, of course, the pandemic revealed to all of us just how important social relationships and friendships really are, and it sort of was it put in stark relief this thing that we had often taken for granted. But I had not been taking it for granted because I had spent the 5 years just before the pandemic hit researching this very subject and looking at why it is that friendship is so very important. And so for kids, we have known for a very long time that being able to have just one really good friend is critical for children's well-being. And we've known that for 50 years. But what we know now, in addition, is that there are biological and evolutionary reasons why that should be so. And the thing is that we adults, we think we appreciate that fact and we know it, but we don't really talk about it with kids the way that I think that we should. We tend to talk to kids about achievement, about working hard and doing their homework, about practicing or whatever it is. We talk to them about skills that are involved in time management a lot. But we rarely talk about the skills that friendship involves. And yet friendship is one of the most important things kids can learn. In fact, what they learn about friendship when they're young is going to serve them for the whole rest of their life. It's either going to serve them well or hurt them, depending on how they grow up to learn about being a good friend and making friends. So we adults need to jump in. Now, it's not that humans have not appreciated friendship. We have appreciated it for centuries, for millennia, all the way back to Aristotle and before, I'm sure. We've always thought of it as pleasurable and valuable and important, but we didn't think it was essential. We thought it was cultural, actually. We thought it was just a happy byproduct of human language and civilization, sort of a fringe benefit, if you will. And of course, there are many, many cultural aspects to friendship, but that's not all it is. And this idea only started to change when we started to find the link between social relationships and health. And we also started to find friendship or something like it in other species. This was most obvious in non-human primates, like the rhesus macaques there in the top left. Look at that cute guy getting groomed, and the chimpanzees on the top right here. But we see friendships or something like them in elephants and zebras, in all kinds of species. Even fish behave differently in the presence of familiar fish than they do when there are strangers around. They actually freeze when there are strange fish nearby. And what this tells us is that there is something more universal, more fundamental going on here than just a cultural phenomenon. And so it means that, we needed to start asking a deeper question, and scientists started asking, what are friends really for? This baboon here, Sylvia, helped to give us an answer to that. Sylvia lived in Africa, Botswana, and I am sorry to say that she was actually kind of a nasty baboon. She lived in a troop of animals that were being watched by primatologists for years. And so we know a lot about her life. And she treated most of the other baboons in her troop badly. She hung out mostly with her daughter, Sierra. That was her primary grooming partner. And but then, unfortunately, Sierra was killed by a lion. This is something that happens to baboons who live in Africa. And Sylvia was expected. I mean, the primatologist assumed that she would, being the grumpy baboon that she would go off and grieve on her own. But that's not what she did. To their surprise, and presumably to the surprise of the other baboons, she started trying to make friends. So baboons have a grunt they give that means that they come in peace and that they mean you no harm. And that's what she started to do. And so that got the primatologists thinking. They thought, look, why would she change her tune so much at this point? What's in it for her? She didn't want to be alone anymore, right? And so what they did, both in Botswana and in Kenya, they had been following baboons for years and years and years, and they had been essentially watching them and keeping track of exactly who did what to whom. And so they took all of that data and they calculated a measure that really captured essentially how often the baboons were nice to each other and who was nice to whom. And then they compared that to measures of reproductive success and longevity. And what they found was that the baboons with the strongest social bonds lived the longest and had more and healthier babies. Well, that was surprising because everyone assumed that the where you sat in the dominance hierarchy was going to matter most, but it didn't. It wasn't inconsequential, but these strong positive social bonds mattered the most. And what that told us is that, see, in evolutionary terms, you can't do better than this. That's what it's all about, living longer and having more and healthier babies. And so in effect, there was a survival of the friendliest, or you could put it another way, and you could say that the fittest were the friendliest. Now, why? Why would that be? What is friendship doing? In humans, we thought maybe it had to do with, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, but maybe it has to do with the fact that there's someone around to drive you to the hospital if you need to go. But baboons cannot drive each other to the hospital, and yet they're still benefiting. So clearly there's something deeper going on. So I mentioned the link to health. Another set of scientists. So here we have epidemiologists, sociologists, psychologists. They started looking for evidence in humans of this link to health. And beginning in the 70s and 80s, they did the same thing that was going on with the monkeys. They looked at thousands of people over decades, and these studies were actually created really to look at things like prevention of heart disease or predictors of medical problems. But there was some social information in there, and from that, a few researchers were able to see that there was a connection between how socially well integrated a person was and how likely they were to die in 10 years, 20 years, and so on. And what they found was that, people with fewer social ties, people with fewer friends, were more likely to die sooner. It was just a connection, but it was striking. And by 1988, there was the first really important paper was written in Science, one of the most prestigious journals that there is. And it was the first place. You've probably heard or seen the headlines that loneliness is as bad for you as smoking. Well, this was the first place that idea was presented. And at the time, it looked like both social isolation and smoking doubled your risk of mortality. Well, by 2015, we had a whole lot more information, and researchers did what's called a meta-analysis, where they combined a whole lot of data from, in this case, it was for 3.4 million people, and they still found it wasn't quite a doubling, but it was a still very, very important effect. So loneliness was associated with dying earlier. Loneliness and social isolation and living alone was a quarter to a third, made you a quarter to a third more likely to die earlier. Still, the question remained why, and is it really that one thing is causing the other, or is it just a correlation here? Well, we now know that it does, that there are physical explanations for this. There are biological explanations. So relationships, both your friendships for the good or feeling lonely and an absence of relationships to the bad can affect all of these things. They affect how your heart rate, your cardiovascular functioning, your immune system. That's how susceptible or resilient you are to inflammation or viruses. They affect the quality of your sleep. They affect your risk of depression, your risk of dementia, how you respond to stress, and even the rate at which your cells age. So you age biologically faster if you are lonelier. So that leads us to the second big takeaway here, this science of friendship, is that over the long haul, friendship is as important as diet and exercise for our health. And yet we rarely treat it that way. We try anyway to schedule in our workouts and to think carefully about what we eat, but we don't prioritize meeting with friends. At least adults don't. Okay, kids do, but not for these reasons. They don't prioritize meeting with friends in the way that they should if they are recognizing that not only is it fun, but it's good for you. So what are friends really for? Well, they protect us from the lions, the literal lions, if you're a baboon, the figurative lions, if you're a human being living through a pandemic or whatever else it is that's going on in your life. Friends keep us healthy and they increase our resilience to stress and trauma. Now, it would be fair to ask, well, what exactly do you mean by friendship in this case? Because, it's been a little bit of a squishy thing over the years. So technically, you can say that friends, we think of friends as people that we're not related to and not having romantic relationships with, but there's more to it than that, because sometimes people call their spouse their friend, their best friend, or their sibling their best friend. So there's a qualitative aspect to friendship that is important to acknowledge. And so the scientists in science, you have to measure things and you have to in order to sort of make progress, and so they had to define this in order to measure it. So there's a couple of different ways of doing this. So child psychologists asked young children, like these kids are about 3, what's a good friend? And the kids said 3 things. They said a friend plays with you, a friend shares with you, and a friend doesn't hit you. And that's actually pretty accurate. But the biologists looking at both at humans and at other species have arrived at a slightly more sophisticated point of view, but it's related. And they say that a good quality friendship requires 3 things. It's stable and long lasting. It's positive, so it makes both people feel good. And it's cooperative. There's a reciprocity to it, a give and take and a back and forth. And it's relationships that meet this definition of quality that give you those health benefits that I've already listed. So what is loneliness exactly? I think of it as the other end of the spectrum from friendship, but of course that's a little bit inaccurate. But what's really important to understand is that there is a difference between loneliness and social isolation. So loneliness is subjective. It's a feeling. It's a mismatch between the amount of social connection you want and the amount you have. Social isolation, which is what just about everybody experienced to some extent during the pandemic, is objective. It is an actual counting of the number of people in your social network or the number of social interactions that you have. They're both bad for you, but loneliness is considered a little bit worse from a biological perspective. It's actually, and this has been really interesting because this was a theory for years, and now recently neuroscientists have begun to prove it, to show it in the brain. We think of loneliness as an alarm bell. It's like hunger and thirst. It's a warning signal to the body that you need to connect. You need to get up off the couch and call someone or go out and see someone. And so like stress, a little bit of loneliness can actually be good for you if it prompts you to do that, to take action and to connect with people. It's when loneliness continues and is chronic and unrelieved that we start to see the negative ramifications of it. Now, let's talk about babies and children, and we're going to get up quickly to teenagers here. But babies come into the world predisposed to want to be social, but they don't know exactly how to do it. Experience matters, so they have to learn, and they have to develop what's called the social network, the social brain network. Now, this is a kind of a technical slide. The reason I'm showing it is just to give you a sense of how much of the brain is involved in our social behavior. So these networks that are listed here are, all of them include different parts of the brain that are involved in our social behavior, but it's everything from how we what we see, what we hear, how we feel about things, how we manage those feelings, our sense of threat, that's in the amygdala there, the red part, our ability to know what someone else is thinking, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit more. But when babies first arrive, they don't really know how to do much of any of that. And in fact, human babies are born a little bit early. They're kind of underdone, if you will. And so it isn't until about 3 months, but they're so in those first 3 months, they're not actually very social, right? But right around 3 months, something magical happens, and they do two things. They are suddenly able to have a mutual gaze with their parents, and they have a social smile. We call it the social smile, right? To distinguish between the sort of little funny grimaces and things that they've been making before. Being social, by definition, means doing something that has an effect on someone else. And that's what babies right around 3 months are suddenly able to do. It's why parents fall in love all over again. Or maybe, if we're honest, for the first time, there are some parents who need that sense of social give and take to really bond with their babies. And it's certainly when a lot of parents say that they start to feel that their child became a social creature. And over the first 1,000 days of life, which is roughly the first 3 years, there's a steady and robust sort of fine tuning of the brain's ability to tune into social signals. So babies get more and more interested in human faces and human voices literally by the day. Like, you can tell if a baby was born on Tuesday or Wednesday by looking at the maturity of their social brain. And so this is a baby in the baby lab in London, and where they use this. I want you to know this is entirely non-invasive technology here. It's just taking using infrared light to look inside the baby's head and to see how the brain is responding to what he's hearing and seeing. And what they know is that babies respond to social signals, like this woman playing peekaboo, much differently than they do a static picture, say, of a truck, or even a picture of a truck moving. And the way they respond changes over time. The most important thing, or one of the most important parts of the social brain network, is our ability to, or that it gives us the ability to have empathy. Sometimes we call that theory of mind. So empathy is something that neuroscientists have been studying for the last 20 years or so, much more intensely. And they now actually think of the word empathy as a kind of umbrella term to cover 3 basic abilities. The first is really basic. It's a physical kind of sharing of experience. So like when somebody yawns and then you yawn, or when, let's say, a parent's child is performing in a recital or playing in a game, and the parent's heart starts to race because the child is nervous, right? But then the second thing is perspective taking. So that's what these 2 guys are doing, presumably. They know that the other person has a different perspective, a different view than they are, and they're wanting to try to understand it. And then the third thing is more sophisticated still. It's compassion or empathic concern. All of these things have different, there's some different terminology for them, but if we call this compassion, it's not only the ability to know that someone else has a different perspective from you, it's the capacity to care and maybe even to be motivated to do something about it. Now, all of these skills are fundamentally important for friendship. And they continue to develop. So I think I said empathy, or maybe I didn't. Empathy and theory of mind, they really sort of come online around the age of 3, although they begin earlier. But we used to think that they stopped, that they were sort of mature by middle childhood, but they're not. They're actually continuing to grow and change all the way through adolescence. And so, we have to have empathy to be able to have friends. So it's really essential. Now, how kids think about their friends changes as their brains mature, right? And as they're capable of more sophisticated things. So we've met these kids before. You remember that they said that friends play with you, share with you, and they don't hit you. Well, that's very concrete way of thinking about friendship. And that's what young kids are capable of. As kids get older, their sense of friends, it gets more relational, more abstract, more emotional, but the same kind of themes continue. And there's a long-standing model that explains how kids, and adults for that matter, make friends. And it really begins usually with shared activities. And then when you have a deeper emotional experience that comes out of that activity, that's when the relationship starts to get stronger. And when kids get to school away from their parents, so first, the first part of learning that they do to be social comes in those first years at home, mostly with caregivers and parents. When they get to school, there's a way that they start to learn to be social that is different, that they can't get from their parents. So they learn about collaboration and loyalty and how to give support and not just receive it, right? That's not something that's easy to do with your parents because they're in charge of you. They're taking care of you. And they learn the rules of childhood. Then we get to adolescence. And if you want to understand friendship in adolescence, you really need to understand the adolescent brain. So in neuroscience, adolescence is not from 13 to 19. It actually runs from about the age of 10 all the way to the mid-20s. So it's really from the beginnings of puberty all the way to young adulthood. That's how long it takes the brain to completely mature, which I like to tell my 23-year-old who thinks he's all grown up. He's not quite done. And during this time in adolescence, one of the major discoveries in the last 20 years is that there is a gap or an imbalance in development. So the emotional parts of the brain, the limbic system, sort of jumps out ahead of the parts of the brain that control judgment and reason and things like that. It's not that that stuff is gone, isn't happening, it's continuing to mature. It's just that the pace of development is out of whack. And so we get this gap, and it explains a lot about teenagers. It explains a lot of the risk taking. It explains why their emotions can run so strongly in their teenage years. During this adolescent period, there's a very important growing sense of self and identity that is taking shape. And adolescents are super sensitive to acceptance and rejection. Now, look, we all are. Nobody likes to be rejected, and everybody loves to belong. It's one of our driving motivations in the world. But we will never be as sensitive to these things as we are when we are adolescents. Interestingly, adolescents are also very concerned with status and respect, and you can track exactly how concerned they are by their level of maturation. So once you go through puberty, both boys and girls, the level of testosterone changes in their bodies, and that level of concern with status and respect pretty much tracks with how sexually mature they are. And so that's really important for adults to know because it affects how we talk to kids. They don't want to be patronized, and they want autonomy and respect. And if we talk to them, in my case, I'm going to tell you to talk about friendship, but we have to talk to them in a way that acknowledges this switch that's just happened. The inflection point is like 8th grade. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that neuroscientists have and psychologists have started to explore the way that adolescents have a serious need to contribute and to find purpose. And that's not something we always think about teenagers as wanting, but it is part of their finding their sense of themselves in the social world and among their friends, and having a sense of being valued and of belonging. All of this kind of kicks off, as I said, in puberty and middle school, that's when, both for the biological reasons I just named and just for developmental reasons, kids are starting to have their identity kind of take shape and their interests tend to solidify. Either they get interested in something for the first time, they try more things, or those interests deepen and solidify. They get good at something, and their friendships tend to grow out of those interests and that identity that they start to form. Now, the social and emotional learning that we talk about with kids is especially critical because neuroscientists, some of them now think that the brain is actually in a sensitive period for social emotional learning during adolescence. So a sensitive period in the brain is a moment when the brain is especially primed to take in information about a certain thing and to learn from it, and then to lay down wiring, and then that window kind of closes. So some sensitive periods in the brain are much more kind of formal, like, so for vision and hearing, I know about this because my son is deaf. If you don't get any sound in the brain for the first couple of years of life, eventually parts of the brain change. The real estate changes kind of because they don't need this, they don't need to process sound, so they process other things instead. Now that's a much firmer thing. The social and emotional sensitive period is a little bit, it's not as formal, but there's still this idea that maybe this is a really, really prime time when kids are learning about these things. We already know that, but maybe it means that there's opportunity here, that they are open to adults sharing positive information, scaffolding social experiences for them, and helping them to figure out. I think of social emotional learning as figuring out where you fit in the social puzzle of your world, right? And so it involves all these things: awareness of self, management of your emotions, awareness of others, and stronger relationship skills. An important point to make is that popularity does not equal friendship. It's not to say popularity is bad necessarily, but we often think of it as the sort of goal of adolescence for a lot of people. And in a really interesting study that came out in 2019, followed 169 kids from 15 until the age of 25, so for 10 years. And they found that the kids at 15 who had prioritized a very close, deep friendship showed relative increases in self-worth relative to the other kids, increases in self-worth and decreases in mental health symptoms, as you can see. By contrast, kids who were more focused at 15 on broad popularity were much more likely to have higher social anxiety by the time they were 25. That tells us that quality matters most. It's the same lesson we got from the baboons, that if we have to pick, it's not that a quantity of friends is not a good thing, or it can be good to have a whole bunch of friends. It can be good to have a variety of friends, but the most important thing is that we have a couple of core, strong relationships where we really feel sustained. That's what we should all be striving for, kids and adults. Now, one of the things that, here's another little fact about friendship that I think is important for kids and adults to know. In this case, I'm talking specifically about sixth grade, but I think it's emblematic of the trajectory of friendship in the rest of our lives. So a study at UCLA followed thousands of kids starting in sixth grade and all the way through high school and beyond even. But in sixth grade, one of the things they found is that 2/3 of kids change friends between September and June of sixth grade. Two-thirds. So that means it's the norm, right? Far more people are doing that than aren't. But I'm pretty sure if you ask most sixth graders, they think it's just them. So, and now I'm asking you, I know I'm asking you to hold in balance two kind of competing ideas, because I said that friendship should be long lasting and stable, but now I'm telling you that there's a lot of change that comes. Both things are true. What you want are relationships that build over time and get stronger and sustain you. But you have to recognize that there will be change and that is normal and okay. And that especially now, a part of why this happens in sixth grade in America, of course, is because we change the schools. You go often from a smaller elementary school to a bigger middle school, and you have a different pool of kids. But it's also that developmental stuff I talked about. Your interests are changing. So the same thing, though, happens when you get to high school. It happens when you get to college, right? You start to figure out who you are. And I think it happens in life. I mean, adults, if they think back, they'd probably find that, yes, we tend to hang on to a couple of friends from different parts of our lives, some people more than others. But there's been a lot of change too. There are people who were a much bigger part of my life at some point, and now I don't see. Maybe they moved, maybe, our lives diverged in different ways. And that's okay, as long as you're sort of refilling in the circle of close friends. Now, of course, there's a dark side to friendship in adolescence and everywhere else, but especially in adolescence, because I said kids are feeling so keenly both acceptance and rejection. I want to talk about the relationship between loneliness and these other things. So the thing to know is that there's a kind of sequence, and it takes a couple of years. So kids, in this case, these are middle school statistics, because that's the study that I drew this from is about middle school, but something similar can happen in high school too. So if a child is lonely in sixth grade, they will feel social threat in seventh grade, and then they will start to show symptoms of depression and anxiety in eighth grade. So there is a line there, and it's really important. But the good news, such as it is here, is that there's an opportunity to intervene in sixth grade. It's not going to happen instantly that child is going to become depressed and anxious necessarily. So we have a little time to act. So it's not the loneliness all by itself that creates the problem. It's that there's a sort of domino effect. Now, just as there's the negative, there's the positive of friendship in adolescence. Because of the way the brain is structured for teenagers, everything, just as rejection feels terrible, acceptance feels amazing, right? Everything that feels good in life feels better to an adolescent. It's why adults, I'm guessing most of you will agree with me, you probably have some really sharp memories of good things that happened in adolescence or bad things, and you remember them more clearly than you do things that happened later in your adult life. And it's because your brain was primed to remember those experiences. We actually remember the things that we feel more emotionally strong about. So kids are getting rewards in their brain. You've probably heard about dopamine and the other happy hormones that we have. So it's rewarding to be with your friends, and it starts to just release lots and lots of dopamine in the brain. And then we want to keep coming back for more. And some of that is a good thing, because it's how we build friendships. By wanting to be part of it, we build the strong relationship, and then that allows us to have those people there when we need them. But the problem with kids, of course, is that we worry about what they do for that rewarding sense of friends. So people talk all the time about peer pressure, but I actually want to talk about what is called peer presence. And this is so the point is pressure doesn't have to come into it. Just by being there, friends have an effect on adolescents. Even in mice, actually. So if you put an adolescent mouse in a cage with a little reward, so mice, they give them alcohol actually because they like the sugar in it, and they push a little button, they get drops of alcohol, they do more of that, they press that button more often if there are other adolescent mice in the cage. And if they are in the cage by themselves, they're less interested in the reward. So humans are the same, right? But here's the really important thing. The presence of peers can be a positive influence. If your teenager hangs out with kids who are, serious about their schoolwork or dedicated athletes or whatever it is, into theater or something like that, that can rub off in the good way. In fact, researchers find that if kids pair with a close friend on a collaborative project in school, the thinking is deeper and more cognitively challenging than if they pair with someone they don't know as well. And so I think that's really important for parents and teachers to keep in mind, because often we think of friends at school as a source of distraction and bad behavior, and that can be, no question about it. But there's also something we can make use of here, that desire to be with their friends. And so we need to remember that. Now, on the other hand, the presence of peers has an undoubtedly negative effect sometimes too. So kids are 4 times more likely to crash a car if friends are in it with them. In fact, I've seen somewhere something that says that the chance of an accident goes up literally with each new kid that's in the car. They are more likely to, oh, and by the way, adults drive more safely if there are other people in the car. Kids are more likely to try alcohol and drugs for the first time if they're with friends than when they are alone. They're very unlikely to try on their own. So it matters who kids are hanging out with, right? And you're also probably going to want to know, where are they hanging out with them? So social media is a big, big issue, of course. And before the pandemic, the conversation about social media was kind of following a pretty tried and true pattern. So we have a history of freaking out over technological change, sometimes with good reason and sometimes less so. We freaked out over comic books, for instance, in ways that might surprise us today. But the thing is that the pandemic, of course, has forced us to rewrite the script a bit, because the conversation was all about the amount of time we were spending online, and then it was the only way we could interact for a lot of people for a long time. And so, there's a lot that we want to know about the effect of that scientists haven't actually discovered yet. That in fact, they tried to do that work before the pandemic and they didn't get funding. And now they are sort of trying to do things like understand the difference in value between a video chat and some other form of interaction online. But what I want to talk to you about are a couple of studies that came out just before the pandemic, and just before my book was published. So I was able to get them in. And I think that they're really important because they were very rigorous and more careful studies than had been done before. You have to remember that social media is a new thing. Digital technology and is relatively new. The very first study that compared social media use and well-being was done in 2006, and those first studies were pretty blunt instruments. And really, all they had to measure was the amount of time that people were online. There is a vast variety of things you can be doing with that time online. You can be watching pornography or playing a violent game, or you could be talking to your grandmother or researching your history paper. And hopefully those things are not the same in their effect on your well-being. So What we know is that context and content matter far, far more than the total amount of time kids are online. And those are the things that adults should be thinking about. Now, here's one of the studies I want to tell you about. This came from Oxford University. And what they did was they looked at data on I think it was 350,000 adolescents, and they wanted to compare. It was the big data sets that had a lot of information about all different kinds, parts of kids' lives. And so they wanted to know how much of the variation in well-being over all of these kids can be attributed to technology use. And they did find that some was, and it was negative. It's the second, this purple bar, the second one from the bottom here. But what's important to see is that it explained less than 0.5%, 0.4% of the difference in kids' well-being. And wearing glasses, this bottom thing here, was actually worse for kids' well-being than how much they use technology. Riding a bike a lot had a bigger effect to the good than technology use. Things like getting a good night's sleep and eating breakfast were really important. Things like bullying were terrible for kids' well-being, much, much worse than technology. Now, to be clear, we're talking here about a population level, about all kids, and that is not, it doesn't mean that technology is perfect for everyone, but it does mean that we need to see the forest for the trees, and we need to be asking more nuanced questions about when we worry about social media use and when we don't. The other study I want to tell you about was another meta-analysis. So they combined everything all the way from that study in 2006, the very first one. They took all the data, any study that compared psychological well-being and social media use, technology use. And what they found is that, as you might expect, there are trade-offs. There are both some positive effects and some negative effects for our well-being. There's different ways of measuring well-being, but all of the effects are small. And the largest one is the effect of social media on relationships, and it's positive. It's still small, but it's positive. So in general, the larger your social life online, the larger your social life offline. And if you use social media as an additional way of communicating with friends that you see in other ways, you strengthen those relationships. Just quickly, gaming, because so many parents have concerns about this. Gaming is actually really, really social. And it's important to know that, first of all, 97% of boys and 83% of girls play video games, but 3/4 of them are playing with somebody else, either in the room or over an online connection. So I am not saying that people should play video games all the time, but I do think that adults, and I count myself as guilty of this, see the video game and we don't see the visceral connection that's going on between kids sometimes. The pandemic, of course, raised the stakes on social media and screen time and all of our concerns about kids' mental health. And it changed everything, and we were right to worry, right? There were big increases in mental health issues for kids, girls a little bit more than boys, and nearly every child suffered some kind of social effect on their lives. How much so and what affected, so age and home life and personality all helped to determine who suffered and who didn't. And I see I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to hurry a little. We can come back to some of these things, but there's some important stuff to talk about here. A resilient individual nurtures their social support system. That is one of the main things we know about the science of resilience, is that friends make a difference. They help us get through things. That, of course, and I'm not the first to say this, is why the pandemic was so hard, because the thing we always do, go to our friends, we couldn't do. So how can we adults help kids, and how can they help themselves? Well, the really important thing to know that adults can do is actually well, first of all, with adolescents, it's all about conversation. It's about communicating, right? Because we're less able to limit what they do in their lives than when kids are really little. But kids who have strong supportive relationships with the adults in their lives, those adults are much more likely to be able to influence their behavior with peers. So you need to be building those relationships, and you need to be talking about friendship. And when you talk about friendship with kids, I want you to think about these three things: statistics, skills, and situations. Share information about friendship. I mean, I'm saying statistics, but it doesn't have to be statistics. It can be some of the things that I've talked about today. There's a ton of these things in the book, but the fact of how many kids change friends in 6th grade, or time, how much time it takes to become a good friend. 50 hours to make a friend, it's like 90 hours to consider someone a good friend, and 200 hours of time together to become best friends with someone. Another thing is that a recent study showed that people like us way more than we think they do. We're all afraid of making ourselves vulnerable and of meeting people. And this study, it included some adults, but it also included freshmen in college just meeting each other. So that's not too far off from high school students. And those first conversations we have, we often go home and we think, oh, they hated me. I wish I was funnier or kinder or smarter or something. And we might aspire to be all those things, but usually you did better than you think you did. And another really important thing to convey to kids is that popular is great, but really you only need one friend. People ask me all the time, how many friends do I need to have? And it's lovely to have a variety of friends, but to get these health benefits, what you need is a really good friend. Just one will be enough. The skills, friendship, I said, we come into the world predisposed to be friendly, but we don't exactly know how to do it. We get better at it as we move through childhood and adolescence. And so adults need to talk to kids about the skills that they need to be a good friend: how to read the room, how to think about social boundaries, how to be okay if not everybody wants to watch the movie that you want to watch, right? How to manage your emotions. And kids need opportunities to practice that. Of course, was the big problem in the pandemic, was that a lot of that practice got shut down. That definition I gave you, I think it gives us a real guide to how to be a good friend. So if a friend must be a stable, positive, cooperative relationship, then we should be a steady, reliable presence in people's life. We should be positive. We should make people feel good. And we should be helpful. We should show up, right? And then situations are really important because friendship grows out of shared interests and out of proximity. And it sounds like it's the advice that everybody gives all the time about how to make friends. Oh, go join a club or find something you like. And it sounds mundane. It sounds almost sort of too corny to be true, but it is true. Friendships do grow out of shared interests, shared sense of humor, shared worldview, things like that. And it's a much better idea to try to go do something you like and try to meet people there than to try to go do something that you don't like just because it's what everyone else is doing. And parents need to remember that too. I've had people ask me, shouldn't I sign my son up for flag football because that's what all the kids are doing? Only if your kid likes flag football and wants to do it. Otherwise, it's not likely to be much of a success. If a child is really struggling socially and you're really worried, child psychiatrists suggest that the thing to do, first of all, is to look across social situations. So how does your kid do with siblings if they have them? How do they do with cousins maybe at a family reunion? Do they have good friends at camp maybe, but not at school? That's a good sign. It's important to know. And then you want to look at what's going on at camp. What are the dynamics there? What are those kids like? And you want to try to look for more opportunities for that kind of relationship. If there is nowhere where your child is socially adept or comfortable, then maybe you should consult a professional. But the other thing you want to do as an adult is help kids know that there are a lot of people out there. There are a lot of things to do in the world. There are a lot of ways to be. There's no one way to do friendship. So that you should keep looking, and you should tell your kids that their people are out there. There's one more statistic I want to leave you with. I told you before that where you are with friendship when you're 15 affects your mental health at 25. Well, you know what the best predictor of health at 80 is? It's how satisfied you are with your relationships at 50. So what this tells us is that friendship is a lifelong endeavor. It's a skill that we have to master, a muscle that has to be worked, and that it has a knock-on effect from the beginning, right? If you're good at it early, you have a head start, but it's never too late. So if we want our kids to end up like these ladies, I have their picture here above my desk as my inspiration for where I'm trying to head in life. To get here, you start here. And we grown-ups can help by remembering the friendship factor all the time, nurturing it with our kids, valuing it, talking about it, and modeling it in our own lives. I'm going to stop there and say thank you. You can find me at my website here, and I have a newsletter and all kinds of stuff there, but I'm happy to take some questions, and I hope I didn't go over too much.
No, it was wonderful. Really, really wonderful. Such important information. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions. First of all, let's hear from our students. Teresa, you're up first.
Hi, yeah. My name is Teresa Gutierrez. I'm a senior currently at Glenbard East, and my question for you today is that since we have lived with COVID these past many months, I've observed many teens are kind of hesitant about making friends. Do you think it's like a lack of experience or confidence, or maybe a lack of social interaction? And whichever it may be, what can we do about it?
Guess what, Teresa? Adults are feeling the exact same thing. When we are going back out into the world, it's all of us are out of practice. For teenagers, it depends how old you are and what your situation is, but you too have been out of practice, and you are, and I'm not kidding. Like, I went to an event with people I've known for 15 years and I forgot everybody's name, and I called somebody by their wrong name and stuff like that. So it's a phenomenon that is not just for kids. But the answer is that we do have to get back out there and keep trying. We have to recognize that it's not just us. We have to make ourselves a little bit vulnerable. And even maybe joke about it and say, I'm out of practice being social, right? Sometimes you defuse the situation with people when you do that. But kids should definitely, this would be one of the examples where I really would want kids to understand that that's not just them. And that it's not easy to go from living in your house and never seeing anybody for months and months and months to suddenly being surrounded by so many people and so much, all the things we used to do. And if you're a little bit younger adolescent, when you're still in that kind of real social learning phase, you literally haven't learned. Like, there's a little bit of a lag in your social development. And so kids are kind of picking up where they left off, but maybe there's a gap. It's almost like a premature baby comes out, and we tend to talk about them as being the age that they, not their biological age, but their the age that they should be, like their gestational age. And I think I'm making this up. I haven't heard a scientist say this, but I think it's probably true that kids who missed some developmental stuff are going to be playing catch up, and that's totally normal.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Teresa. We've got some more questions, but you're reminding me to tell people about what's coming up, because we're going to carry on this very conversation. So Jerica, do you want to pull up in January when we will be back again? We're going to first hear from Dr. Goldie Muhammad. She'll be talking about helping all children thrive. And then Amy Moore, and I know you know Amy Moore, and she's been with us before, 13 Things Mentally Strong Kids Do on January 19th at noon and 7 p.m. And then we've never hosted David Epstein before. The author of The Sports Gene will be talking about range. So some of these very topics will come again. So put those on your calendar. Madeline, you are up next.
Hi, my name is Madeline Sabahar. I'm a senior at Glenbard South. My question is, what do you think is the biggest mistake kids make while trying to make friends online and in the real world?
That's a good question. I have two answers. So one thing that I think almost all of us do when we're trying to make friends, this is more in real life, but we don't listen enough. We talk too much. In our house, we call it the how it pertains to me form of conversation. And the reason we often do that is not because we're not necessarily because we're egotistical, but because it's more comfortable to talk about ourselves. So that's what we do. We listen to somebody else's story, and all we're doing is trying to think about what we want to say. And instead, we should be really deeply listening and then asking questions and following up. So that's a kind of a skill question that's really more in person. But both online and in person, I think that the biggest mistake that young people make is trying to be friends with people who don't necessarily make us feel good, or whose values don't line up with our values. Maybe it's just because they are popular, like I had the thing I talked about, the difference between popularity and deep friendship. The more kids can have a sense of who they are and who they want to be, and surround themselves with people who are like that, the happier they will be and the healthier they will be as they go on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question in the chat. My son has autism. He eats lunch alone at school many days. My school tells me that it is okay. We all need downtime. What can I do to help him? I have been able to get the social worker do a lunch group. This will only be once a month. Do you think that's enough?
I think you're right to worry, because I think of lunch it's kind of the fulcrum of the social scene in schools, and so but the first thing I would say is that it's really important to know how your son, I think it was a son, right, feels about it. Is it you assuming that he doesn't want to be alone at lunch, or is he telling you that? I happen to know because I did write a story, and maybe you can look it up on my website. I wrote a story about friendship in autism. And we often think that kids with autism don't necessarily want to seek out friends. They're not as interested in being social. And that really isn't true for many, many people. And so, I'm guessing that you are correct, that your child would like more interaction. I think it's great if the social workers can set up lunch groups. I would advocate for more than once a month, if possible, maybe once a week. I don't know how hard that is to pull off. I also think there's a program this is more complicated, and I don't know if you can do this in the school, but there's a program that researchers in LA tried where they have other kids learning about how to about sort of interacting and how to pull people in with them. I mean, my kids' school, at least in middle school, I think this isn't true in high school, but they don't let kids just sit anywhere. They have assigned seats all the way through middle school so that at lunch they're not, that this doesn't happen. It really is going to require talking to the school about what's possible, and trying to advocate. I don't know. I have some other thoughts, but maybe you can email me or contact me through Gilda or something, and we can talk about it. But I would look up the article that I wrote about autism.
Very good. So You talk about the importance of the parents' role modeling. What happens when your child has the painful loss of a friend and you as well? How can we best help them in those times?
I just want to make sure I'm clear understanding. So when a friendship ends, either your friendship or their friendship, how do you, well, in terms of talking to friends about it, or talking to our children about that, this is where being honest about how hard this is for adults too, I think is really important, and talking about the ways that you tried to handle it. Also understanding that this happens, that not every friendship goes on forever, that change is normal. There's two sides to this coin, right? One is if you're on the side where you're getting rejected, and the other is whether you are no longer feeling like a friendship is healthy for you. And it can be very hard to sort of step up in that situation and take action. I might ask my kid, if the child is the one who is being rejected, I would try to investigate a little bit or ask some leading questions that could get at what kind of friendship they really had and whether, in fact, it was a healthy one for your child, because it might not have been. And so sometimes kids are trying to hang on to a relationship without really realizing that the friendship isn't serving them either. So if that's the case, and you can gently point that out, you might be helping them to get past it. And helping a little bit what I said to Madeline too, reminding kids that there are more kids out there, and that the important thing is to find kids who share your values and your interests, and that there are other possibilities, but you have to let them sit with the pain of it. It is hugely painful. And in fact, we grieve the loss of friendships almost like we do loved ones. And we should acknowledge that. That's okay. Like, that's legit, and people shouldn't feel that just because it's a friend, that they're not entitled to feeling so upset. But then you do have to help. You don't want to ruminate on it, and you don't want them to ruminate. You want to help them try to find some strategies to feel better and to move on. Oh, I can't hear.
This is our last point here. Could you possibly display the friendship fact slide again? That was a good one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll reshare here. Hang on just a second. And I'll go back. This one. So 2/3 of kids now, like
the friendship factor slide.
Oh, the factor at the end. Oh, sorry. Okay. This one.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe that's what they were asking for.
Okay. What this is all about, I'll just reiterate, is acknowledging the really, really critical role of friendship, and not just taking it for granted with kids, or in your own life either, grown-ups. Talking about it, and if we start really young, we get a head start. And if you're going to start talking about it now when they're in high school, great. And talk about what you like about your own friends. Talk about the good and the bad of your relationships. If they never see you prioritize going out with your friends, they're not going to think that it matters that much once you get to adulthood.
That makes me think about, one of our speakers said recently that if we don't make adulthood more appealing, why would
anyone want to do it? No, I like to think that all of my work is about helping people appreciate that hanging out with their friends is good for them, and that they can and that it's like going for a jog. I'm giving you permission to hang out with your friends. Your kids are already doing that or wanting to do that, right? And so you can appreciate what they're doing, and then you can also appreciate it for yourself.
Great book, great topic. lots of information. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who listened in. Thank you, students. Thank you, Lydia, for writing this book and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here with you all.
Loved it. Thank you, everybody. See you next time. Take care.